Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy addressed the UN General Assembly Wednesday, warning that Russia is planning to attack his country's nuclear power plants. Zelenskyy called on member nations to stand together and also criticized Russia's veto power in the UN Security Council. For more on this, I'm glad to bring in Ambassador William Taylor. He's the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine and the vice president of Europe and Russia at the U.S. Institute of Peace. Ambassador, it's good to have you again. As you have done so many times before, give us your assessment at the moment of the condition of the war and the Ukrainian people.
So, John, I was there for about a week. I got back about a week ago. And Ukrainian people have been fighting now for 944 days. The Ukrainian army has been fighting for that long against the Russians. They're tired. They're very tired, John. They have gained some momentum in the past month or so because they have taken the fight to the Russians, into Russia. They've been firing deep into Russia with their own weapons, their own drones. They've blown up an enormous ammo dump. So the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian military are feeling like they've got some momentum going on. President Zelenskyy, as you know, we'll probably talk about this, is here in the United States to make that case for the continuation of the support. So the battlefield you ask about, it's going as well as you could expect. That is, the Ukrainian army fighting for that long, outnumbered, outgunned, but holding them off for all this time, and they've gone into Russia. The Russians are taking back little by little, taking little more of Ukraine each day down in the east and in Donbass. And so it's a mixed picture there, but right now the Ukrainians are feeling a little bit better than they were the last time I was there when they were pretty down.
President Zelenskyy is going to meet with President Biden to talk about this peace plan. What might be different about such a plan than his idea of peace when this not long after the invasion started? I mean, is there something that might actually kick off a peace process?
What will kick off a peace process, John, is Putin's recognition, President Putin's recognition that he can't win this war. And he will come to that conclusion when it's clear to him that the Americans will continue to back the Ukrainians, when the Europeans will continue to back the Ukrainians, and when the Ukrainians show that they're going to continue to resist. President Putin's attacks on their electricity generation and distribution systems is making it miserable for Ukrainians. He thinks he can break the Ukrainians. So far, he's not having that luck. So what can change? Yes, is his recognition that he can't win.
So then, keeping that very much in mind, President Zelenskyy urged world leaders not to seek an out from Russia's war, which to me sounds like him saying, stay with us, stick with us. And then I'll add to that, the Republican nominee for president doesn't seem that anxious to support Ukraine. His running mate seems even less so. So if I'm Putin, I'm going to hang on for a little while, it seems, if the Europeans are seeking an out and the possible new American president might not be interested.
So you're right. President Zelenskyy is urging his allies, the Americans, the Europeans, to stick with him because you're also right. Putin's only strategy is to wait us out, hope that one side, either the Americans or the Europeans or the Ukrainians, will break. He thinks he can wait us out. But if when he realizes that that's not a winning strategy, then he's going to be able to look for a way out. He's made a mistake, and he needs to find a way out of that mistake.
Finally, Mr. Ambassador, tell me your thoughts about what President Zelenskyy mentioned in terms of these attacks on the nuclear power plants and the grids. What's the fragility of the power situation, and is that a real threat, and what could that mean?
It's a real threat. If the Russians were to bomb one of the several Ukrainian nuclear power plants, it could be a disaster. It could be a disaster for the local environment, but it could be a broader disaster. We know that radiation spreads when there's an explosion, when there's an accident. And this would be an explosion caused by a Russian attack. So President Zelensky is right to be concerned about that. So far, the nuclear power plants that are not occupied by the Russians, the biggest nuclear power plant is occupied by the Russians in Ukraine, but the ones that aren't have been able to continue to generate power. And the Russians have gone after the coal-fired plants and the gas-fired plants and the distribution to make the Ukrainians cold and dark. And if he were to also go against these nuclear power plants, it would be a disaster for electricity in Ukraine.
Former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, William Taylor, we're grateful, Mr. Ambassador. Thanks again for being with us.
Thank you, John.